Hey, welcome to the Malm podcast. We're back. I'm Joël here with Dad.
And I'm Rick. Glad you're here too. Where should we go today?
Well, that last episode, I didn't really like how it ended. So we're going to record.
It was a fantastic ending.
While we're in the studio, we're going to finish up a second episode. We were talking about unnecessary suffering versus necessary suffering. And I think we landed, I thought we could cover both of those in 15 minutes. I mean, how big of a topic is suffering, right?
Yeah, pretty big.
Yeah, we talked about last episode how kind of every religion and philosophy in the world is an attempt to explain where pain and suffering come from. But we talked about last week how there is necessary suffering. But I wanted to lean into unnecessary suffering. I think the conclusion we came to last week is that necessary suffering is when you go through something that is training you for what God has in your future. Even Jesus didn't get around that. We had some disagreements on what Jesus' suffering looked like. But I think
purposeful, or what?
Yeah, I think you eventually came around to my point of view, but I'm just kidding.
Go listen to the back one there.
But that said, we didn't get to unnecessary suffering, which I think is what happens when we don't understand principles. Yeah. So the question we always have to ask ourselves is this something I caused, or is this something that is necessary for what I'm growing? And the crazy thing about it, and this is where I think maybe there's not a dualistic answer to it, if you turn it over to God, even the unnecessary suffering you created can often be something he uses. I work with a lot of people that come to me and they want prayer, and they're trying to clean up a lifetime of bad decisions. Yeah. And I usually tell them, this is going to take a while. I was praying for a guy the other day, and he said, I need you to pray for me. I'm going to be going to jail for a long time. This was something I did 4 years ago. I just now got through court. Apparently COVID just backed up the courts. And he's like, I need you to pray that I don't have to go to jail. And I was like, I didn't even ask what he did, but I'm like, I don't know that I can pray that you don't go to jail, because that may be the result of the consequence of what you've done. But I am going to pray that God's going to give you exactly what you need to become what he made you to be. And he was like, well, that's good, but I don't want to go to jail. I'm like, well, I know, but maybe jail's where you need. He's like, I'm a different man. He's
that
like,
might be necessary suffering, though. Yes, exactly.
Right. And he was like, no, but that was 4 years ago. So a lot of people spend a lot of time cleaning up for bad decisions they made, and they realize, my father-in-law, Glenn Holland, he says this. He says, sin complicates things.
For sure.
Like there's all these things that you shouldn't be that way, but it's like once sin gets involved, it is what it is, and you have to deal with the consequences of it. Even if you've turned your life around, there's stuff that catches up to you.
Yeah, there are still consequences. Jesus, even though he was raised from the dead in his glorified body, he still had holes in his hands. There were still and that was consequences of our sin, his death and everything, but there were still the nail holes that were there.
Which brings up another interesting topic, because a lot of times people suffer because of somebody else's decision. Right. I was just talking to somebody this morning, and she was saying that they adopted these two daughters, and one of them has some major mental health issues. Yeah. And she was saying she's mad at her birth mother for the bad decisions her mother made. She didn't have any say over that. Yeah. And so many times we grow up at a disadvantage because of decisions somebody else made. And you go, is that unnecessary suffering, or does that shift into the realm of necessary suffering because it's something you had no control over, that God says, I'm going to use this for my glory? And that could be a real flippant answer that I'm not really comfortable with. If somebody just says to you, well, this is all for God's glory, just embrace the pain.
Well, the less flippant would be, no, there's pain that it's not necessary. It was caused by somebody else. But now you determine, am I going to make it worse with unnecessary by letting bitterness and anger, and am I going to let that seethe within me and eat my gut up with all the acid that it produces? Or am I going to release it, give it to God, and turn it loose and live my own life and suffer my own consequences? Because we're all going to make bad decisions.
I mean, that's what Frankl said, Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Mm-hmm. So it's the idea that the suffering is turned around for good when you choose to how you're going to respond to the thing that happened, even if it was out of your control.
A lot of things that happen to us are out of our control.
Yeah.
And so is that necessary, unnecessary? It may not fit into either of those categories, but what you choose to do then can lead to unnecessary suffering. And I was just thinking, if you're in that situation where you're like that guy, he's trying to clean up the mess, and you can always destroy something really quickly, but it takes a lot longer to rebuild it. And so you need to know that too. If you've made a mess, if you've really screwed things up, you can fix it, but don't think it's going to happen as fast as you messed up. I'm not trying to discourage you. I'm just saying if you're in the middle of that and it's taken longer, that's normal. It's okay.
And sometimes the suffering involved in putting it back together is what you needed.
Yeah.
I was thinking about something, when we were asking about that question, I don't think we actually got the question answered last episode, but the question of how do you know when you're in a situation, if it's whether it's suffering or unnecessary suffering. I actually thought at the end of the episode, but it was too late. I thought about something, our friend Marcus Avalos, he said something last Sunday, and it was interesting to me. He said, whenever I'm facing pain and suffering, I always ask myself this: am I out of alignment with God's principles or disobeying? Am I out of alignment with my spouse? And am I out of alignment in some way with relationships around me? And he said, if I'm not in any of those, then I have to believe this is something God has brought and allowed into my life for the sake of my growth, which is that suffering versus I know. I was like, that's a really good framework.
Yeah.
Because so much of what we do is because we get out of alignment with, first of all, you disobey God, you're going to pay some consequences. He's just set up the world to work in a certain way. But also you have a lot of suffering out of alignment with your spouse or out of alignment with your family or with your kids. I thought that's a great kind of 3-question rubric for going, is this something I caused, or if it's not? And what's challenging with that is, I always think about Job's friends, and I've had some of Job's friends as my friends when I'm going through a hard time, and they go to the easy answers, and they go, but it's that, right? So it's 3 things, but I don't know that it's good for another person to ask that of you unless you're asking them, right?
Yeah.
So for example, they're like, well, are you hiding sin? And I'm like, probably. I mean, who's not hiding some sin, right? Like I can't think of it right now, but I'm sure there's some sin that I'm hiding, right?
Yeah.
And maybe that's why it came upon you. And you look for these easy answers for why suffering is on people. And it's a tough one though, because what's that in counseling or in psychology, we talk about kind of the 2 extremes of mental illness. Is one extreme is neurosis, where everything's my fault. I blame everything on, it has nothing to do with me, but I figure out a way to make my fault. Character disorder is everything is somebody else's fault. You never take personal responsibility. So neurosis is taking too much responsibility. Character disorder is taking no responsibility. And we all fall on a continuum somewhere in between there. And I lean toward neurosis. I can find a way to make something my own fault. Oh, I brought this on myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe we bounce between it too, because there's some things we just don't want to admit that maybe some areas we maybe say, okay, that's my fault, but others we may not want to be honest enough to say, I did wrong in that. Because expanding that out, I was just thinking, because what he's talking about is relationships, but you can also have problems.
You're talking about with Marcus's 3.
Marcus's.
Yeah.
Spouse, Lord, spouse, and other people. But it could be, if you're suffering financially, are you in right relationship? We call it principles. Are you in following biblical principles for finance? Because if you're out of right relationship in financial realm, you're going to have problems in the financial realm. So it'd be kind of a matter of looking at what area it is. Oh, are you having physical problems? Are you out of relation and taking good care of your body and what's good there? You still may have some. It may be your DNA. It may be things you can't help. You get born with a weak back or whatever.
Yeah, you just got bad genes, right? It's truly not your fault.
Right. But that's a great way. But in whatever area you're suffering in, check: am I walking in right relationship with? Am I aligned with the principles of God's Word in that area? And that's where, maybe, because again, particularly if you're a new believer, I don't know what the biblical principles are. I thought you go out and you take out a loan and then God provides for the loan because you prayed for it, And,
right. Or I heard this one a lot. God provided the loan. I'm like, did God provide the loan? God provided your slavery? What? I
got my credit card limit raised. I know that was the Lord, and I've been making the minimum payments for years and I don't seem to be getting out of debt though, so. So the point is,
those people that believe in instant debt relief through God or whatever.
Yes, yeah. Well, so that's really where a biblical counselor or somebody or a pastor can come in and say, but the area you're hurting in, what are the principles of that? Are you lined up with what God's word says in that area? Because he really addresses every area of life, but it's not all systematically.
Man, I wish it was systematically. That's one of the frustrating things about the Bible is
it's all sprinkled in there.
Everybody's like, oh, it's basic instructions before leaving Earth, Bible, basic instructions before leaving Earth. And I'm like, well, a normal instruction manual would be a little more systematic.
Yeah. But the way he's done it, though, it's like he took diamonds and sprinkled them across the earth.
Right.
And then in Proverbs, he says, it is the glory of glory of the God to hide a matter. It's the glory of kings to search out a matter. So throughout the scripture, there are little jewels that are just under the surface. When you read it over, you may not get it. You have to dig a little bit deeper. And when you're just starting, it helps to have great teachers who will lead you in that, or have somebody. That's why it's so important who we listen to.
That's interesting because Jesus said that too. They're like, why are you talking parables, man? Be more straightforward. And he's like, no, I talk in parables so that those who want to understand will understand, and those who don't want to understand won't understand. And you're like, huh?
Yeah, I don't understand, but I want to.
But it's the willingness to look a little deeper rather than just give me the instruction. Which is what maturity is. Are you looking deeper into the heart of the matter, which is what a mature person does, right?
And in all of it, here's a cool thing about it. You're going to suffer some consequences if you're out of line with his word, but it's not the head knowledge that really makes you right with God. And I believe God gives a whole lot of grace to people who have a heart for him and are like maybe messing up in little areas. I mean, if you're doing big things wrong, that's obvious. If you're living in adultery, well, come on, that's pretty clear in there. You knew that before the Bible, If you're stealing from people, that's pretty big. But if you're just making little mistakes, I think God gives a lot of grace there if your heart is right, because God looks on the outward, or man looks on the outward appearance. God looks at the heart. He sees your heart. And so he gives a lot of grace. That's not an excuse, but I'm saying when you're starting out, God give a lot of grace. And you've seen that with new believers. If you want a prayer answered, go to a new believer. God seems to answer all their prayers, And then before long, it's like, it doesn't happen. Now it's time for you to grow up, and it's time for you to go dig a little bit. It's time for you to develop your relationship. He said, you will seek me and you find me when you search for me with all your heart. He causes us to grow up to where we begin to dig deeper than just living at the surface level. There's grace when we're new believers in it, but he wants us to grow up and begin to go deeper level. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
And suffering is a part of that. That's our topic.
Well, and that's where I think, a lot of people kind of dog on, I grew up in this legalistic background and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, I'm actually kind of grateful for the legalistic background I grew up in. You weren't particularly legalistic, but a lot of people that raised me were. But I realized, man, it helped me avoid a lot of unnecessary suffering because when you... I said that recently to somebody who got really triggered when I was like, I think a healthy legalism is great for kids because it saved me a lot of pain.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things I didn't experience, didn't even feel the need to experience because I knew the pain that it was going to cause. And I go, man, I'm so grateful that I had this legalistic background. Later, I look at it, I'm like, that's a little bit more than I needed. But really, the law, if you follow it, stops unnecessary suffering.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does. And we've talked about this before, that children need the law because they aren't able to understand grace. As you get a little older and you realize there are consequences for sin, then grace is applied. You go, oh, thank God, that was grace. But as a child, grace is translated, I got away with that one.
Right.
And so, and I could give you, we've talked about this before.
Yeah, that was a profound truth when you said that. It shocked me. I was like, oh my gosh, I've known that instinctively, but I didn't realize it. And I was talking to a mother the other day of 5, and she's like, when your dad said that on that podcast, she's like, I kind of started to wonder if some of the problems I'm having with the kids are, am I giving them too much grace? And they can't understand grace. What they understand is, sweet, I got away with it. Yes.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty profound truth. But I back to that idea that, we do avoid a lot of unnecessary suffering. And this is the power of learning God's principles. This is the power of the law. There's nothing wrong with the law. The law is perfect, reviving the soul, it says. but we can't live up to it.
Yeah.
That's the problem with the
We're
law.
weak. It's not.
Yeah,
It's
actually, the law is not the problem. We're the problem.
We're
We
the
can't live up to
problem.
it.
Yeah, exactly.
But the idea that the law actually protects you from unnecessary suffering, I think that helps you see the law in a whole new way, because we have this thing in church where like, well, you need grace.
Yeah.
You know, we need grace. I'm like, we do need grace because we can't live up to it. But man, the law really keeps you out of trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody said it this way. I think it was Finney said, you cannot understand the good news until you first understand the bad news. And then one guy explains this way. If somebody says, keep that parachute on in the plane, well, I don't want a parachute. That's uncomfortable. Well, if you understand the bad news that the plane's going down, then you're not going to let go of that parachute. And so you got to know the bad news before the good news becomes good news.
Thanks for listening. Please consider sharing this with your friends on the platform of your choice. For more from Joel Malm, visit joelmalm.com. For more from Rick Malm, visit rickmalm.com. Our podcast music was produced by Alex Burleson.